House Speaker Ryan, we haven't talked about him enough, I know. Speaker Ryan leaving a lot of folks wondering still. But this time they're wondering what in the world is his thinking. Listen to Ryan as he ostensibly tried to defend President Trump.
The president's new at this. He's new to government. And so he probably wasn't steeped in the long-running protocols that establish the relationships between DOJ, FBI, and White Houses. He's just new to this.
Much to his credit, I might add. Joining me now to discuss the bombshell moments from Comey's testimony today, and of course, Paul Ryan's always interesting take on things. Co-host of The Five, Kimberly Guilfoyle, joining us here tonight. Kimberly, let's start with Paul Ryan.
Where shall we begin?
What is he doing?
What is he doing?
He's new to this.
Yeah, was he new to it too?
Oh, I don't think he was ever. I think that son of a gun was born in the fetid fields of Capitol Hill. I mean, he is just a beauty.
He's a beauty, isn't he?
Oh
my goodness, the apple of his parents' eye.
Well, speaking of beauties, and not in the literal sense, but James Comey.
Right.
I mean, come on. This was a demonstration today that had, I could only imagine the White House.
You almost seemed surprised by it today. Like it was just,
this was more entertaining than anything I had ever conjured up. But I could only think of the White House just cackling to themselves, pop-top beers flying through the air and having a great time. I mean, they watched a man who had been a pain in their sides or wherever for some time just self-destruct.
Yeah, it's unbelievable to see. It was quite a spectacle, right? Probably wasn't even anticipating that, given the pre-release, statement from yesterday.
The fancy pre-release. Yeah.
I mean, my goodness. And then here we are. Which one?
All the media folks going, 7-page prepared statement by James Comey, and they would read through something that was pure balderdash.
Right, exactly.
And then today came the real balderdash.
Highlighted with tabs. Pull all your tabs off because the head of the FBI just outed himself as the leaker-in-chief.
Could you believe that?
Can you even imagine that? To his friend, who's a Columbia professor.
Right, yeah. Daniel Richmond, by the way, Professor Daniel Richmond.
And then the Columbia website where his thing was like crashing from all the traffic. But it's unbelievable. And he was like, well, I want to say that this was my personal recollection. So sorry for you. That would be discoverable in a court of law because it's your work product notes contemporaneous with you performing your government job as the head of the FBI.
I failed to mention that Kimberly is an attorney, former federal prosecutor.
A real one, not
and she went after bad guys like it wasn't pretty.
Let's just say I have a taste for them.
All right.
But I mean, what Comey? I mean, what is he going to do? What is he thinking now? That was like unbelievable.
What is next?
Display.
I mean, no collusion with the Russians. There's no obstruction of justice, which, by the way, there never was to begin with.
Which, by the way, the president has said. Then there was a. What do you make of the fact that the president's attorney, issued a statement, yesterday saying. This is consistent. The president's been vindicated. I go, well, that's an accurate statement because everything the president said was just confirmed by this statement, was consistent. The fact that he was not under investigation. And there's no crime that's been committed here.
The president says on 3 occasions, 3 occasions, he said, I wasn't under investigation. Today, 3 occasions, the president was never under investigation.
I mean, that's what you call winning. It's like the Super Bowl of legal moments. If you have somebody there that's supposed to be your antagonist, all of a sudden become your star witness for the president, saying that, in fact, yes, on 3 occasions, I told him that he was not under investigation.
And then basically, the former director of the FBI put his hands up like this, said, lead me off to jail. I also have been leaking government documents. Which, now he says is a private document because he was fired, but the paper was printed by the federal government and it was done on federal
people own that paper,
You're darn right.
Right? We own that paper.
It's the people's government.
So I think...
Led by, not Comey.
Not Comey.
President Donald J. Trump.
Who had a victorious day today. And so there you go. Now you've gotten to the bottom of the truth about what happened and what transpired. I don't know where Comey thinks he goes from here, but maybe we can get back to the business of running the country and putting the president's agenda forward without all this nonsense.
One would hope. And for for Mr. Comey, I believe that the days are going to be somewhat quieter.
And how about the Democrats? I mean, they got the vapors now, the Russian vapors. They're going up in fumes.
I don't know. No one can even find Senator Chuck Schumer, but then again, very few people are looking.
Something that Mr. Trump says is simply not true. And all the animosity, unlikely to end with the media in hysterics after the president warned Comey against leaking to the press and floated the idea of, hey, how about canceling those press briefings? Fox News Chief White House correspondent John Roberts has our report.
Tom, good evening. I can't ever remember a time when the President of the United States said what President Trump did about James Comey today. In the middle of a ferocious tweet storm from the president this morning, a remarkable shot across the bow to his fired FBI director. The president warning, quote, James Comey better hope that there are no tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press. The president was referring to 3 occasions on which he claims Comey told him he was not being investigated in connection with Russia.
He said it once at dinner, and then he said it twice during phone calls.
The tweet raised questions as to whether President Trump was recording his conversations. At the daily briefing today, Press Secretary Sean Spicer refused to elaborate.
I've talked to the president. The president has nothing further to add on that.
And when asked if the tweet was an implied threat against Comey.
That's not a threat. He's simply stated a fact. The tweet speaks for itself. I'm moving on.
The tapes tweet was in reaction to a story in the New York Times that the president had asked Comey to make a pledge of loyalty to him. The president may have thought Comey was leaking the contents of their conversations, though he today denied asking Comey to pledge fealty to him.
No, I didn't. But I don't think it would be a bad question to ask. I think loyalty to the country, loyalty to the United States is important. You know, I mean, it depends on how you define loyalty. Number one. Number two, I don't know how that got there, because I didn't ask that question.
As the backstory to Comey's firing continues to evolve, it is becoming clear that the Russia investigation was very much on the president's mind, and it continues to be. Last night, unprompted, President Trump sent a letter from his tax attorney to Senator Lindsey Graham, who had said he wanted to look into the president's business dealings with Russia. The letter, dated March 8, stated that with a few exceptions, a review of the last 10 years of the president's tax return showed no income of any type from Russian sources, no debt owed to Russian lenders, no equity investments by Russian persons in Trump entities. But the president did make money from the 2013 Miss Universe pageant held in Moscow and the $96 million sale of a Florida property to a Russian billionaire. While the letter referenced the president's tax returns, the returns themselves were not released. President Trump also lashed out today at the media's coverage of the shifting explanations for Comey's firing, tweeting, quote, as a very active president with lots of things happening, it is not possible for my surrogates to stand at podium with perfect accuracy. Maybe the best thing to do would be to cancel all future press briefings and hand out written responses for the sake of accuracy. While the initial tweet appeared merely sarcastic, later today the president seemed to be seriously considering canceling the daily briefing simply to spite a media he believes is unfair to him.
I actually said we shouldn't have them. These press conferences are like the biggest thing on daytime television.
They are.
Okay? You see the ratings. They're blowing away everything on just about, I think, everything on daytime television. What I'd love to do is stop them.
The ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner, said if the president does in fact have tapes of his conversations with Comey, those should be turned over to the appropriate committee straight away. And whether it was the president's tweet or he just didn't want to do it, James Comey today said that he was not going to take up the Senate Intelligence Committee on its invitation to appear before a closed hearing on Tuesday. At the White House, John Roberts, Fox News.
All right, John, thank you. And sources telling Fox News tonight that the Trump administration will begin interviews for FBI director tomorrow. Joining me now to discuss Mr. Trump's tweets and the Comey firing and the so-called witch hunt over alleged links between Trump and Russia, veteran of 10 presidential campaigns, Republican strategist, Fox News contributor, the Dean, Ed Rollins. Ed, what do you make of this? What's your just overall?
My overall thing is the president certainly had the right to choose his own person to run the FBI. He'd probably been better to do it on January 20th, and that's not the issue. And what I would have done when I removed him is I would have said thank you for your 30 years of government service. He was a deputy attorney general. He was a U.S. attorney. Obviously been FBI director for 4 years, and let him go. and then go find someone perfectly to put in that position and move forward. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever of the president being involved in any of this Russian stuff they're talking about. That investigation is going to continue to run. But right now, to the people of the FBI, you have to say thank you. People have worked very hard. Mr. Comey worked very hard. It's just time to move forward. The problem you have now is you get all this controversy and throwing out the word tapes today, which for those of us that lived through Watergate, it's it's just sort of like what tapes. And I think to a certain extent, my assumption is there are no tapes, and if there are, we're certainly going to know about them pretty quick. And someone ought to walk into the president and say, Mr. President, we've had a couple of presidents who basically paid a heavy price for taping their memoirs or whatever, and it's best if you don't have that.
So is this simply Donald Trump getting used to being president as opposed to running his own organization? Because you've got, I heard Dana Perino on her podcast talking about the communication team wasn't used properly, that you go in and you kind of set up a plan and you say, well, here's what we're going to say, here's how it's going to go down.
Absolutely. It's the critical thing in any, whether it's a campaign or in the White House, and I worked in a couple of White Houses, is you always have a story of the week or a story of the day. If the president wanted to fire him on Tuesday, you basically waited till Wednesday. You said, here's who's going to go out and talk. Here are the talking points. Here's what we're going to say. You don't have your press operation out there doing one thing and saying one story and you tweeting the others. I admire the fact the president says, I want to basically put things in writing and send them out. That's called a press release. It's gone on for 100 years, or it's presidential statement. Sure. And then it gets signed off and checked on. That's not the problem that we've had in this campaign or this presidency. He gets that little tweet in the morning and he expresses an opinion.
But remember early on, I can't remember the exact date. I think it was just prior to him taking the inauguration. They were talking about maybe moving it over to the old executive office building, having the old big theater over there. And the Washington press corps, the White House press corps went crazy saying, no, 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 we have our special little room here that we want to ask you questions. So he was going to expand it. And now he's thinking about cutting it off completely. Well, is this just him doing jujitsu with the media?
I think to a certain extent it's some of that. The media, the people who are in the White House press corps are the best, in most cases, the best of the journalists in the world. It's a very aggressive group. They're very smart people. And it's a peer group, so you want to always be on the cutting edge. And I think the reality is one's an adversary relationship, White House people, and one's an inquisitive. The reality here is you don't have to do a press conference every day, but if you don't, the reporters, our people, it's a 24-hour news cycle we live in. They're going to want to know the story. So if they don't get it from Sean Spicer or Sarah Huckabee or from the White House, they're going to go to a source, and they're going to write. They're not going to stop reporting, and they're not going to stop looking at things. So at the end of the day here, you can fix this. And the best way to fix it is to get the president to say, all right, what is my plan? What is my press plan? What is my communications plan? Now, we're going to Europe next week. It's very, very important that he have a great trip there. He's got to get a perfect FBI person picked that's not going to be controversial and move this thing forward and quit talking about Comey.
Well, I think a lot of people look at this and think it's great entertainment. I'm more concerned about, is this going to, his role with the media is been what it is here in New York for a long, long time. Sure. That's not going to change. My concern is his role and his relationship with Congress. Is he going to be able to get the tax cuts and the Obamacare repeal and those big legislative pieces done?
At the end of the day, that's all that matters. He doesn't care about the fact he's got lousy approval numbers. His attitude is, who cares about that? I had bad numbers and I won the presidency. The problem is when he has bad approval numbers, his party has bad approval numbers, and there's a dramatic drop-off in the generic vote between members of Congress, between the Democrats and the Republicans. They're sitting up there where they basically are all enthused about moving stuff, having tough battles on both the things you talked about, healthcare. And all of a sudden, people are saying, you may lose. What happens if you lose this House? Where's your popularity? Where's your president behind you giving you cover? And that's what he has to basically
pay attention. That's where I want the focus to. My 2 cents is to the president is focus on that legislative
and that's
agenda.
all that anybody's going to care.
Forget the media.
People are not going to care about Comey or any of the rest of it in November of 2018, but they are going to care whether there's a health care bill, whether there's tax bills, whatever.
I agree with you. Ed Rollins, always great to talk to you. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you
very much. Well, we're coming right back and much more, so stay with us. Russia engaging in more provocative behavior. Defense officials today confirming that a Russian fighter plane passed within 20 feet of a U.S. Navy reconnaissance plane over the Black Sea. Russian Su-27, it was armed with 6 air-to-air missiles under its wings as it buzzed the Navy P-8 Poseidon which was in international airspace. Now, one official tells Fox News it's very rare for a Russian jet to intercept U.S. aircraft while visibly armed, making this incident, quote, highly provocative. And another incident yesterday, a Russian Su-24, it flew past into the South Korean air defense zone, prompting the South Korean military to scramble 2 of its fighter jets to the Sea of Japan. The Russian jet came within 70 miles of the USS Carl Vinson Strike Group, which arrived in the area last month. So the White House today also confirming its shortlist for FBI director, among them being considered former New York Police Commissioner Ray Kelly, former House Intel Chairman Mike Rogers, Congressman Trey Gowdy, Senate Majority Whip John Cornyn, and acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe. Senator Cornyn is among those being interviewed in this process tomorrow. Well, joining me now to discuss Russia's provocations, Trump's decision to fire Comey, the White House's efforts to replace the FBI director, former CIA operations officer, co-host of the Station Chief podcast, Scott Eulinger. And where do you want to start with this, Scott? Let's start with Russia.
Sure.
That's an area you know, and the fact that they are doing these provocations means what?
Well, Russia has always conducted provocations against our forces, particularly in the Soviet time. However, they are increasing lately because Putin's increased confidence in dealing with the international community, which, has not stood up to him for the past 8 years or so.
Yeah, but there's a new sheriff in town.
That's right. So
is this a test on Donald Trump?
It is a test, certainly. The Russians will continue to move forward until they feel resistance. So perhaps the Russians will feel that on the diplomatic front as we continue to point out Russia's actions and sanctions against them in places like the Ukraine and all, and also in Syria.
So the president's going to be meeting Vladimir Putin in a few months at the G20 meeting,
right,
I believe
exactly.
it is. And so is that a place where these kinds of things can settle down?
Certainly it will be. It will be. I think a personal meeting will do a lot to kind of diminish the current tensions that we have. And of course, I fear that a lot of our relations are also being adversely affected by this constant Russian collusion story that's baseless, but is being circulated in the U.S. media constantly. We have some legitimate problems with Russia that we need to negotiate. However, it makes it more complicated for our diplomats to do their job if there's constant rhetoric being thrown about in the American press that really is baseless against Russia.
Well, there's two parts of it. There's the part about it was somebody on the Trump campaign in some sort of collusion. That's on that investigation. But there's the other part about the Russians interfering in our election, the DNC hack, and some of those sorts of things. I mean, I don't think the Russians, correct me if I'm wrong, are embarrassed about that.
No, the Russians are can often be blatant with these tactics. They were very blatant in the recent French elections, taking definitely the side of Marine Le Pen with financial supporters, pretty open. However, I believe that their success, if you want to call it that, in our election was primarily due to the fact that we don't have a very vibrant bipartisan press. And so it allows Russia to exploit some of the lack of bipartisanship in our media and basically carry forth with their mission.
There's got to be somebody in the Russian government who's getting bonuses right now because of the fact that all of this, they're getting more mileage out of this than they ever thought they were going to get about disrupting our democracy, just taking apart this country, taking the unification, if there is any, and trying to tear it apart.
That's right. We need to take a real serious look at what is at Russian interference in the election. And we also need to seriously investigate, for instance, some of the not too clean ties that have been shown to be between John Podesta and Russia, as well as Hillary Clinton and Russia. So a real investigation into this has not only got to continue what it's doing right now, but needs to increase the sphere of investigation by looking at things like Podesta's Russian assistance to John Podesta's businesses and all, which he never reported.
His brother received big fees for
exactly.
very little. So I think as well, that's an area that I think may open up if they start digging around in there. They may find something that they may not want to find. But let me get real quickly, the rogues gallery of the FBI nominees, maybe, that we just showed a few minutes ago. Do you have any preference on any of them?
I think it would do well to perhaps appoint someone who is a professional attorney or professional officer, perhaps a member of the FBI, rather than a political official, because certainly in this current climate, there's going to be a lot of pushback from the Democratic side on any politically backed, political candidate.
I agree with you. I know law enforcement likes to have somebody from their own ranks.
Exactly.
But there's also people saying maybe the leaks are coming from within the FBI, so maybe you need an outside professor. I don't know what.
Right, exactly.
All right. Listen, Scott, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on today. Be sure to vote in tonight's poll because, well, do you believe the national media will ever stop its campaign of disinformation against President Trump? Cast your vote on Twitter @LouDobbs. And a reminder to follow Lou on Twitter @LouDobbs. Like the show on Facebook and Instagram @LouDobbs tonight. Meantime, on Wall Street, stocks closing mixed. The Dow falling 23 points. The S&P down 4 at NASDAQ. Went up 5 points today. Volume on the board, big board, 3.3 billion. And for the week, the Dow and the S&P down a fraction. The NASDAQ posting fractional weekly gains. And growing trouble for Wells Fargo. The bank may have opened as many as 3.5 million unauthorized accounts, according to attorneys for the victims. 1.4 million more than previously reported. Huge, isn't it? And a reminder to listen to Lou's financial reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. President Trump today fulfilling his promise to be the law and order president. His Attorney General Jeff Sessions ordering prosecutors to seek tougher sentences for drug offenders, reversing policies of the Obama administration. Fox News correspondent Peter Ducey has our report.
You drug dealers are going to prison.
And with that, a Trump campaign promise of law and order became an instruction for America's law enforcement. A 2-page memo from the Attorney General to U.S. attorneys warns criminals prosecutors will now almost always pursue charges with the longest possible sentences. And mandatory minimum sentences will even apply to drug offenses with which the last administration tried to be lenient and considered nonviolent.
We are returning to the enforcement of the laws as passed by Congress, plain and simple. If you are a drug trafficker, we will not look the other way.
That's a major change from an Obama administration approach designed to reduce prison populations.
A primary driver of this mass incarceration phenomenon is our drug laws, our mandatory minimum sentencing around drug laws.
One of Obama's attorney generals, Eric Holder, now says, quote, the policy announced today is not tough on crime, it is dumb on crime. But the Trump White House says the change was carefully crafted.
This policy was formulated after extensive consultation with the prosecutors that handle these cases each and every day around the country.
Prison reform advocates are alarmed by the prospect of a return to the war on drugs.
The problem with the war on drugs was that it swept up not just people engaged in high-level drug offending, but lots of people in the lower levels of the drug trade. That had very little impact on drug use and abuse.
On Capitol Hill, Democrats and at least one Republican are scoffing at this new policy, too. Senator Rand Paul says, quote, mandatory minimum sentences have unfairly and disproportionately incarcerated too many minorities for too long. Attorney General Sessions' new policy will accentuate that injustice. But a former federal drug czar sees things differently.
When they say, you know, when the Holder crowd and President Obama say go easy on this stuff, they want you to think what they're talking about is some guy sitting in his room toking up on a joint. That's not the kind of cases we're talking about. They didn't prosecute major drug dealing cases, and this has created more of a problem.
I was with the Attorney General in West Virginia yesterday when he announced a more aggressive approach to rounding up drug dealers. And now he's saying what he wants to do once they are in custody. Sessions is not proposing any new laws, just saying that this department will no longer pick and choose which ones to enforce. Tom?
All right. Thank you, Peter Ducey. Meantime, a massive international cyber attack hitting tens of thousands of computers in at least 74 countries, including the UK, Russia, Japan. The attack affecting FedEx here and crippling Britain's health services, with hospitals and clinics forced to turn away patients. Hackers reportedly used a so-called ransomware tool. They stole it from the NSA, our national security agency, which blocks people from using their computers until they pay in some sort of digital currency like Bitcoin. So it's pretty massive. But we're coming right back with much more, so please stay with us. Well, President Trump speaking out about his warning to ousted FBI Director Comey on leaks. Those comments during an interview with Judge Jeanine set to air tomorrow night, 9 o'clock Eastern, on Fox News Channel.
What about the idea that in a tweet you said that there might be tape recordings?
Well, that I can't talk about. I won't talk about that. All I want is for Comey to be honest, and I hope he will be, and I'm sure he will be, I hope.
Well, joining me now, the executive editor for the Weekly Standard and Fox News contributor Fred Barnes, and partner at Maslansky and Partners, Lee Carter. Start with you, Lee. I saw you when you came into the building. You walked into the green room. I was kind of behind you. You didn't know I was there. And you looked at everybody in the green room and you went, "What a week!" And I thought, yeah, pretty much. Where do you want to start?
This is the week where you say, thank God it's Friday, and that hopefully they can put this all behind them. It's been a horrific week for the president and for his administration. This should be a week where we're talking about health care, where we're talking about tax reform. They had a plan. They're moving things forward. Health care. There was a vote on Friday. The Senate said they were going to revisit it. Let's move things forward. Aetna dropped out of the health care exchange, and now what are we talking about? Russia, Comey. Just total distraction, and they can't let it go. It's a shame. It's unfortunate, and we're going the wrong direction.
Well, Fred, I mean,
I agree.
A week ago, we were talking about what a great week President Trump had.
Right.
So the ups and downs of politics.
Well, he only has one person to blame for this being such a bad week, and that's himself. Look, he had every right to fire Comey, James Comey, the FBI director. It was not an abuse of power or anything like that. It was fine. But then he has to start elaborating on it. He has to undercut the rationale that he got from his aides, both at the Justice Department and then repeated by his press people. Now he's talking about, well, maybe their conversations were taped and so on. I mean, this is very destructive, and it makes it hard for others, other Republicans, for instance. But there is a way out, and that is to name a respected, professional FBI director. He needs to do that soon. There's a lot to choose from. He could pick a Democrat, but he needs to get it right.
Yeah, he needs to do it. I would think, Lee, he would also need to do it. You don't want to look like you're rushing it, but you got to kind of rush it, because if we're going to get back to talking about health care and tax bills and other things like that, better get this thing off the table.
Well, I would have hoped if he was making this decision, and we know that he was thinking about it for a while. He had an interview with Maria Bartiromo earlier in April where he said it was something that he was considering. So you would hope that he has people under, that he might be thinking about putting out there and putting forth right away, and he's got to do it quickly, and it's got to be somebody who is really nonpartisan, who everybody can get behind, and we can start moving things forward.
But Fred, listen, a lot of the people that are really solid supporters of the president, they aren't moving 1 ounce on any of this. They love the battle with the media. They love the battle with the Democrats.
Yeah,
so,
Tom, they are not a majority in America.
No.
There are plenty of them. He does have a base. They're loyal. But there are not enough of them to reelect him, and there are not enough of them to keep Democrats from doing very well in the midterm elections next year. The president has to start thinking about that, because they're so important. Because if Democrats win, say, the House of Representatives, and they certainly have a chance to do that, he will find that being president is a lot harder than it is today. Democrats.
So handicap it for me, Fred. Tell me, what are the chances of an Obamacare repeal, replace, repair, whatever you want to call it? What's the chances of getting that legislation done this year?
Well, they're not quite as good as they were last week, but I think they're still good. But Republicans are going to have to realize that they may not get exactly what they want. The conservatives in the House are going to have to accept some things that not liberals, but moderates in the Senate are going to insist on. And because the choice is going to come down, if this is successful, it's going to come down to a choice between a replacement for Obamacare or keeping Obamacare itself. And so I think that should be an easy vote, but I thought some of these other things were.
Let me get Lee to handicap this. What do you think? The chances of getting this done?
Look, I think there's chances, but I totally agree that there's going to be some compromises along the way. But they've already demonstrated that they can make compromises. We saw that with some of the budget things that have gone through. So I think definitely it's possible that it's going to go through. I think we're going to have a tough road ahead because we're talking about all the wrong things. What we need to be doing is selling the plan that's in front of us, not having conversations about tweets and other things that are big distractions from the agenda.
No question. Thank you, Fred Barnes, Lee Carter. Thank you both very much. Good to see you.
You're welcome.
Well, North Korea today issued a new warning to the U.S. after the House last week overwhelmingly voted to impose new sanctions against the regime over its nuclear program. Fox News correspondent Benjamin Hall has a report.
North Korea has taken an unusual step, sending a rare letter of protest to the U.S. Congress. On May 4th, the House voted in favor of tough new sanctions against the North, and the rogue state responded in writing, condemning them as heinous acts against humanity. The letter is the first official action by North Korea's newly restored Foreign Affairs Committee, which was revived last month after 19 years to improve relations with the rest of the world. But the North Korean Vice Foreign Minister showed no such signs of outreach.
America is not just trying to intensify its attempts at isolation, pressure and nuclear threats against our country. It's also going all out to try and eliminate our supreme leader.
This a reference to North Korea's claim last week that the CIA and South Korea's intelligence service plotted to assassinate Kim Jong-un with a biochemical weapon. And today they demanded the extradition of South Korea's spy chief here on the left, accusing him of being the mastermind. But after the swearing in of new left-leaning South Korean president, relations between the neighbors could get closer. President Moon has said that he favors expanded economic relations with the North and dialogue.
If necessary, I will fly straight to Washington. I will go to Beijing and Tokyo, and if the conditions allow, to Pyongyang as well.
And today, President Putin also reached out, telling Moon in a phone call that Russia was ready to play a constructive role in resolving the North Korean issue, and that he would be pleased to welcome a special envoy. The election of President Moon in South Korea could be hugely significant. He is himself the son of North Korean refugees. He favors dialogue with the regime. He opposes the deployment of the U.S. THAAD anti-missile defense system. And now with Russia reaching out, it's going to be very interesting to see who he works with. Tom?
All right, Benjamin Hall, thank you very much. Meantime, joining me now to discuss tensions with North Korea and President Trump's first foreign trip, Karen Skinner, the founding director of the Institute for Politics.